I do underwater welding for oil companies. It's dangerous work, but the pay is incredible. Sometimes $2,000 a day for deep dives. Last summer, I was working on a subsea pipeline in the Gulf of Mexico, 180 feet down. The job was simple: inspect a section of pipeline for corrosion, take samples, report back. Standard procedure. I'd done it hundreds of times. I was about 40 minutes into the dive when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. 3 rhythmic knocks, coming from inside the pipeline. I stopped working and listened. Nothing. Must have been pressure equalization or thermal expansion. Pipes make weird noises. I kept working. Then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. Same rhythm, same volume. But this time it was following me. As I moved along the pipe, the tapping moved with me, always staying directly underneath my position. I radioed topside. "You guys doing any maintenance on this line today?" "Negative. That section's been inactive for 6 months. No flow, no pressure." Tap, tap, tap. I'm hearing knocking, coming from inside the pipe. Long pause. Probably just settling. Keep working. But it wasn't settling, because now the tapping was getting faster, and it was coming from multiple points along the pipeline, like something was inside, running along the interior, keeping pace with me. I pressed my ear against the pipe. Through the metal and my helmet, I could hear something else under the tapping. Scratching, long dragging scratches, metal on metal. "Surface, I need to abort this dive. Something's not right down here." "Charlie, that pipeline is empty and sealed. There's nothing in there. You've got another hour of work to finish." Tap, 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 tap. The rhythm was breaking down now, becoming frantic. Random knocking from a dozen different points, like hands slapping against the inside of the pipe. Then I saw it, a section of the pipeline about 20 feet ahead of me. The metal was vibrating, not from current or pressure, vibrating from the inside, like something was throwing itself against the walls. I should have surfaced right then. But I was contracted to finish the inspection, and I'd worked on enough pipelines to know they make strange noises. I swam toward the vibrating section. As I got closer, the tapping stopped. Everything went silent. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. I reached out and touched the vibrating section. The moment my glove made contact, something on the inside hit the pipe so hard that I felt the impact travel up my arm. Boom! Then again, boom, boom, boom. Something huge, throwing itself against the metal with enough force to dent it outward. I shot up toward the surface. Didn't follow protocol, didn't do my safety stops, just fled. I could hear it behind me, that booming sound echoing through the water, as whatever was in there tried to break out. When I surfaced, the dive supervisor was pissed about the aborted dive, until the ROV footage came back. They'd sent down a camera to check what spooked me. The pipeline section I'd been working on had been breached from the inside. The metal was split open like something had burst out, and leading away from the breach were deep gouges in the seafloor, drag marks, each one about 3 feet wide. They sealed off that entire pipeline section, filled it with concrete and buried it. When I asked what they thought caused the breach, my supervisor just shook his head. "Some pipelines run through places we don't understand," he said. "Things get in that shouldn't be able to. Best not to ask what." I still work pipelines, but now when I hear tapping, I don't investigate. I just finish the job and leave, because whatever was in there got out, and I don't want to know where it went. This story is from Marco, my dive instructor. He's been teaching scuba for 25 years, and he's one of the most safety-conscious guys I've ever met. But there's one story he doesn't tell often, the story of why he almost quit teaching. It was 2012. Marco was certifying a group of 6 students for their advanced open water license. They'd already done their basic certification, completed dozens of training dives, passed all their tests. This was supposed to be a celebration dive, a 60-foot reef dive to show off what they'd learned. One of his students was a guy named Daniel. Mid-30s, confident, maybe a little too confident, the type who treats rules as suggestions. Throughout the course, Daniel had been pushing boundaries, ascending too fast, skipping safety checks, showing off for the other students. Marco had pulled him aside multiple times, told him that overconfidence kills more divers than lack of skill. Daniel would nod, agree, then go right back to his bad habits. The day of the final dive, conditions were perfect. Calm water, 80-foot visibility, mild current. They descended as a group, Marco keeping Daniel close. For the first 20 minutes, everything went smoothly. Then Daniel saw something, a large grouper, maybe 200 pounds, sitting in a crevice about 80 feet down. 20 feet deeper than their certification allowed, but Daniel decided he wanted a photo. Before Marco could stop him, Daniel dropped down. Marco signaled for the group to stay put and followed him. By the time Marco caught up, Daniel was at 85 feet, wedged into the crevice with the grouper, trying to get a close-up shot. That's when Daniel's tank got stuck. The crevice was tighter than it looked, and his tank wedged against the rocks. He tried to back out and couldn't. Marco saw panic flash across Daniel's face. Marco signaled, "Stay calm, I'll free you." But Daniel was already panicking. He started thrashing, trying to force his way out. The more he struggled, the more wedged he became. Marco grabbed Daniel's shoulders, tried to hold him still so he could work the tank free. But Daniel was in full panic now. He reached up and ripped his own regulator out of his mouth, at 85 feet, with no air. Marco immediately offered his backup regulator, standard emergency procedure. But Daniel was past rational thought. He grabbed Marco's primary regulator right out of Marco's mouth and wouldn't let go. Started breathing from it in huge, panicked gasps. Marco switched to his backup, tried again to free Daniel's tank. But every time Marco pulled, Daniel thrashed harder, burning through air at 3 times the normal rate. Marco could see Daniel's air gauge dropping, 1,500 psi, 1,500. Marco made a decision. He inflated Daniel's BCD with his own inflation system, creating positive buoyancy. The idea was that Daniel would pop up out of the crevice like a cork. It worked. Too well. Daniel shot upward, Marco's regulator still in his mouth, pulling Marco with him. They rocketed toward the surface together, 85 feet in about 15 seconds. No stops, no controlled ascent, just straight up. At 40 feet, Daniel's eyes rolled back. He'd been hyperventilating so badly that he'd passed out from CO2 buildup. Marco grabbed him, tried to slow the ascent, couldn't. They broke the surface together. Daniel wasn't breathing. Marco started rescue breathing in the water while screaming for the boat. It took 4 minutes to get Daniel onto the deck, 4 minutes of Marco breathing for both of them. The paramedics got Daniel's heart started again. Rushed to the hospital, hyperbaric chamber. He survived, but the damage was done. Daniel had severe decompression sickness from the rapid ascent, nitrogen bubbles throughout his bloodstream, his joints, his brain. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital. When he got out, he had permanent nerve damage in his legs, chronic pain, limited mobility. And the worst part? Marco had decompression sickness too. Not as severe, but bad enough. His right shoulder never fully recovered. He still has pain when the weather changes. Daniel's family sued Marco, sued the dive shop, sued the certification agency. The investigation cleared Marco. Video footage from another student's camera showed Daniel violating every protocol, showed Marco trying to save him. But the lawsuit dragged on for 2 years. Marco won. technically, but he visits Daniel every few months, brings him diving magazines even though Daniel will never dive again, talks to him about the ocean even though Daniel can barely remember the dive that crippled him. I did everything right, Marco told me once. Followed every procedure, made every correct decision, and it still wasn't enough. That's what haunts me. Sometimes you do everything right and people still get hurt. Marco still teaches, but he's changed. Now he washes people out for smaller infractions, won't tolerate even minor rule breaking. Some students complain he's too strict, but the ones who listen, the ones who follow his rules, they all come back safe. Every single one. And that's why I trust Marco, because he learned the hardest lesson a teacher can learn, that sometimes saving someone means being the person they hate. Daniel is alive because Marco refused to give up. Even though it cost Marco his health, his time, his peace of mind, that's what a real instructor looks like. People always want to hear about sharks and giant squid. The truth is, some of the strangest encounters are with totally normal fish doing totally abnormal things. I was diving in the Bahamas, maybe 40 feet down on a coral wall. Beautiful conditions, crystal clear water, just cruising along photographing reef fish. Standard recreational dive, nothing special. That's when I saw the grouper. Goliath grouper, probably 400 pounds. These things are massive, the size of a refrigerator, mouth big enough to swallow a basketball. They're not aggressive, just curious. I'd seen plenty of them before, but this one was following me. Not just swimming nearby, actively following, staying about 10 feet behind me, matching my pace exactly. Every time I stopped, it stopped. Every time I turned, it turned. I tried to shoo it away. It just hovered there, staring at me with those big dead eyes. I swam faster. It kept pace. I changed direction. It followed. After about 5 minutes of this, I started to get annoyed. I turned around and swam directly at it, trying to scare it off. The grouper didn't move, just opened its mouth. Now, groupers open their mouths all the time. It's how they breathe, how they eat, totally normal behavior. But this was different. The grouper opened its mouth wide, wider than I'd ever seen, and just held it open, staring at me. And I could see inside. Way back in its throat something was moving. Not food, not prey. Something pale and elongated, writhing around in there. I backed away. The grouper closed its mouth and went back to following me. I surfaced, told my dive buddy what happened. He laughed, said groupers are weird, said I was overthinking it. But when we reviewed my GoPro footage later, there's a clear shot of the grouper with its mouth open. And you can see it, that pale thing moving in its throat. My buddy stopped laughing. "What the hell is that?" he said. We zoomed in on the footage, frame by frame, and in one frame, just one, you can see it clearly. It looked like a hand, a human hand, reaching out from inside the grouper's throat. My buddy said it was probably an eel or a snake eel, that they look like arms sometimes. But I've seen eels. This wasn't an eel. We reported it to the dive shop. They said groupers sometimes swallow strange things, that it was probably debris or plastic or something. But they didn't look at the footage, they just dismissed it. I've done maybe 50 dives since then. I still see groupers, and sometimes they follow me, and sometimes they open their mouths. But I don't look inside anymore. I don't want to see what they're carrying. Because here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Groupers don't follow divers. They're ambush predators. They sit and wait. They don't chase. Unless they're looking for something or someone. That grouper wasn't following me randomly. It was showing me something, trying to communicate something. And I don't think I want to know what. I can't use my real name for this. What I'm about to describe happened 4 years ago, and I signed an NDA with penalties that could destroy my life. But people need to know. I was hired as part of a team mapping the ocean floor for a private research company. They told us it was for mineral exploration, looking for rare earth deposits, that kind of thing. The pay was extraordinary. $5,000 a day, 6-week contract. We'd be mapping a specific trench system in the Pacific, international waters, no nearby shipping lanes, red flags everywhere. But $5,000 a day makes you ignore red flags. We arrived at the site and started deploying sonar mapping equipment. Standard procedure. The trench went down to about 18,000 feet, too deep for human divers, so we were using ROVs and autonomous mapping systems. The first week was normal. We mapped about 400 square miles of seafloor, mostly flat sediment, some rock formations, nothing unusual. Then we found the structure. It appeared on sonar as a perfect geometric shape, square, about 2 miles on each side, sitting on the trench floor at 16,000 feet. The project leader told us it was a natural formation. Keep mapping. But I've seen enough seafloor to know what natural formations look like. This wasn't natural. We deployed an ROV to get visual confirmation. The video feed showed something that made everyone on the research vessel go silent. It was a wall. Not a rock formation, not a coral structure. A wall. Made from blocks of stone, each one maybe 30 feet on a side, fitted together so precisely you couldn't slide a knife blade between them. The wall extended in both directions beyond what our cameras could see, and here's the part that made my skin crawl. The wall was pristine. No barnacles, no algae, no marine growth of any kind, like it had been placed there yesterday. But our carbon dating equipment said the stone was over 12,000 years old. The project leader immediately classified everything, shut down external communications, confiscated our personal phones, made us sign additional NDAs, said what we'd found was geologically sensitive, and required government approval before any information could be released. Over the next 3 weeks, we mapped the entire structure. It wasn't just a wall, it was a complex. Buildings, streets, what looked like a central plaza. A city, an underwater city at 16,000 feet, made from stone that predated recorded human civilization. And it was huge. The complex covered nearly 50 square miles. We weren't allowed to take samples, weren't allowed to do detailed surveys, just map the outlines and move on. Every night, encrypted transmissions went from our vessel to somewhere. We weren't told who was receiving our data. On the final week, something changed. We deployed an ROV into what looked like a large building entrance. The ROV went inside, cameras rolling. The interior was dry, not water-filled, dry. The camera showed air, corridors lit by some kind of bioluminescent material in the walls, and at the end of one corridor, movement. Something large, walking on 2 legs, moving deeper into the structure away from the camera. The ROV feed cut out. When we retrieved it, the entire memory system had been wiped. The project leader said it was electromagnetic interference, but I saw the footage before it was erased. We all did. 2 days later, the project ended. We were flown back to the mainland separately, paid in cash, given our NDAs with legal language that basically said, if you talk, we own your life. I tried to research the location later. The coordinates we'd been working at are now a designated exclusion zone, restricted operations according to public records. No ships allowed within 100 miles. I also found something else. 3 other mapping projects in different oceans, all shut down suddenly, all at locations with similar depth profiles. One off the coast of Antarctica, one in the Indian Ocean, one in the Atlantic, all classified, all buried. I've been diving with my buddy Jake for 8 years. We've done hundreds of dives together, wrecks, reefs, caves, ice diving. We had a system, trusted each other completely. When you're diving, your buddy is your lifeline. Last month, Jake disappeared. We were diving a wreck off the coast of North Carolina. The wreck was a World War II cargo ship sitting at 110 feet. We'd dived it before. Easy dive, good visibility, no hazards. Just a routine exploration to photograph some of the cargo holds. We descended together, checked our gear at 50 feet, continued down to the wreck. Everything was normal. Jake gave me the OK sign. I returned it. We swam into the first cargo hold. The hold was maybe 40 feet long, filled with scattered debris and covered in marine growth. We split up to photograph different sections. Jake went left, I went right. Standard procedure. We could see each other's lights the whole time. I was photographing some old crates when I noticed Jake's light had stopped moving. I looked over. He was just floating there, perfectly still, pointing his light at the far wall of the cargo hold. I swam over to check on him, tapped his shoulder. He didn't respond, just kept pointing his light at the wall. I looked at where he was pointing. Nothing there. Just rusted metal and algae. I tapped his shoulder again, harder this time. Jake slowly turned his head toward me. And even through his mask I could see something was wrong. His eyes were unfocused, not panicked, not scared, just blank, like he was sleepwalking. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a wide, stretched smile that looked painful. And he pointed at the wall again. I grabbed his arm and shook him. He blinked, and his eyes seemed to focus. He looked confused, gave me the OK signal like nothing had happened. I signaled that we should ascend. He nodded. We started swimming back toward the exit. That's when I realized I didn't know which direction we'd come from. The cargo hold had one entrance. We'd swam in together. But now I was looking at 3 openings in the walls, 3 identical exits. That wasn't possible. The ship's layout didn't have 3 doors in this hold. I checked my compass. It was spinning, not broken. The needle was rotating steadily, like we were surrounded by magnetic interference. Jake was ahead of me, swimming toward one of the exits. I followed, but something felt wrong. The hold seemed longer than before, bigger, the ceiling higher. I looked back and couldn't see where we'd entered. We swam for what felt like 5 minutes. The cargo hold just kept going, same rusted walls, same debris, stretching on forever like a tunnel. Jake's light ahead of me, always the same distance away no matter how fast I swam. Then Jake stopped, turned around, and in the beam of his dive light, I saw his face. He was smiling again, that same wrong smile, and he was shaking his head slowly, like he was saying no. Then his light went out. I was in complete darkness except for my own light. I screamed his name into my regulator, bubbles erupting around me, spun in circles trying to find him. My light hit something. Jake's body, floating face down about 10 feet away. I swam over, grabbed him, turned him around. His tank was gone. His BCD was deflated. His mask was off, and his eyes were open, staring at nothing. I dragged him toward what I hoped was an exit, my heart hammering so hard I thought my chest would explode. Found an opening, swam through it, and suddenly we were out of the wreck. I could see sunlight above. I surfaced as fast as I dared, dragging Jake with me. The boat crew pulled us both out, started CPR immediately. But it was too late. Jake had been without air for at least 10 minutes. He was gone. The medical examiner said drowning, said Jake must have had an equipment malfunction, panicked, took off his gear. But I checked his equipment later. Everything was functional. Nothing wrong with his tank, his regulator, his gauges. And here's what I can't explain. When they recovered Jake's body, his dive computer told a different story than mine. According to my computer, we'd been in that cargo hold for 40 minutes. According to Jake's computer, he'd been underwater for 6 hours. 6 hours in a 40-minute dive. The dive team said his computer malfunctioned, corrupted data. But I know what I saw. I know that cargo hold changed. I know Jake's eyes went blank, and he smiled that wrong smile. I've been back to that wreck since. Brought different divers, different equipment. The cargo hold is exactly as it should be. One entrance, 40 feet long. No magnetic interference, no strange exits. But I won't go inside anymore. Because whatever happened to Jake in there, whatever he saw that made him smile, whatever took 6 hours of his life in 40 minutes, I think it's still there, waiting. And I think Jake knew. I think in those final moments, when he turned around and smiled and shook his head, he was trying to warn me, don't follow, don't go deeper, don't look. I didn't listen then, but I listen now. I work as a commercial diver on offshore oil platforms. The job is dangerous. Deep dives, heavy equipment, high pressure. But it pays well and I'm good at it. I've been doing this for 12 years. Last year I was working on a rig in the North Sea, deep water rig, platform sitting on top of massive concrete legs that go down 500 feet to the seafloor. My job was to inspect the underwater sections of these legs for damage and corrosion. The work was routine. I dive down to a specific depth, work my way around each leg, document any issues, move on. Usually took about 3 hours per dive. On my 4th day, I was inspecting leg C at about 200 feet depth. Cold water, minimal visibility, maybe 10 feet on a good day. I was working by feel mostly, running my gloved hands over the concrete surface and checking for cracks. That's when I felt something wrong. The concrete was warm. Concrete underwater is always cold. Always. The North Sea is practically freezing even in summer. But this section of leg C was warm, not hot, just body temperature, like someone had been pressing their hands against it. I radioed topside. Hey, you guys doing any work on leg C today, heating elements or something? Negative. You're the only one in the water. I kept working, but that warm spot bothered me. Then I found another one, and another. Patches of warm concrete, each about 3 feet across, scattered across the leg surface. And they were in a pattern. Specifically, they formed a spiral, going up the leg. I followed the spiral upward, checking each warm spot. They were evenly spaced, perfectly placed, leading toward the surface. Like something had climbed up the leg, touching it every few feet, leaving heat signatures behind. At 150 feet I found something else. Scratches, deep gouges in the concrete, 4 parallel marks like claw tracks. Fresh. The concrete dust was still hanging in the water. Whatever made those marks was strong. Really strong. You don't scratch through reinforced concrete with your fingernails. I should have surfaced. But I was curious and stupid. I followed the scratch marks. They led around to the far side of the leg, the side facing away from the platform, and that's where I found it. A hole. Someone had dug a hole into the concrete leg, about 3 feet in diameter, going straight into the structure. The edges were smooth, melted almost, like the concrete had been softened and scooped out. I shined my light into the hole. It went deep, past where my light could reach, and I could hear something, a low vibration, more felt than heard, emanating from inside the leg. Then I saw movement. Inside the hole, something pale pulling back from the light, withdrawing deeper into the structure. I backed away, slowly, not making sudden movements, just easing back from that hole like it was a loaded gun. That's when I heard my radio crackle. But not the surface team. A voice I'd never heard before, coming through my underwater communicator. "Come inside." The voice was wrong. Too deep, too slow, like a recording played at half speed. "Come inside. We've been waiting." I kicked back from the leg, putting distance between me and that hole. My dive light caught something else, Another diver hanging in the water about 20 feet away, just floating there, watching me. I hadn't seen him approach, hadn't heard him. He was just there. I waved. He waved back. But the movement was wrong. Too slow. Too fluid. Like he was moving underwater, but the water wasn't affecting him. I checked his gear. Old-style wetsuit, at least 30 years out of date. Regulator that hadn't been manufactured since the 1980s. But he was at 150 feet, in water that should have killed him with that equipment, and he had no bubbles at all. The voice came again. "Come inside, join us." The other diver began swimming toward me, not kicking, not using fins, just gliding through the water, arms at his sides, moving with impossible smoothness. I shot toward the surface, broke every safety protocol, every rule I'd ever learned. Didn't care about decompression sickness, didn't care about anything except getting away from whatever was down there. I surfaced 200 feet in under 2 minutes. Stupid, dangerous, should have killed me. The dive supervisor was screaming at me over the radio as I broke the surface. They pulled me out of the water and rushed me to the decompression chamber. I got bent pretty badly, severe decompression sickness, nitrogen bubbles throughout my system. Spent 4 days in the hyperbaric chamber, another week in the hospital. While I was recovering, the rig sent down an ROV to check that hole in leg C. The hole was gone. The concrete was intact. No scratches, no damage, no warm spots. Like it had never been there. But the ROV camera caught something else. In the footage you can see another diver in the background. Just for a moment. Hanging in the water, watching the camera. Old-style wetsuit. No bubbles. The rig operator classified the footage. Told me it was corrupted data, equipment malfunction. They offered me a generous severance package to end my contract early and sign an NDA. I took it. Haven't worked deep-water rigs since. Because I know what I saw down there. And I know that voice was real. And I know that other diver, or whatever it was, is still down there, waiting in the cold, dark water, waiting for someone to come inside. This story comes from a diver named Karen. She told it to me last year at a dive conference, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. Karen's husband David was a dive instructor. They'd been diving together for 15 years, had done over 1,000 dives as a team. Perfect buddy system, total trust. They were that couple everyone wanted to be. Synchronized underwater, never a problem, never a close call. Last summer they were diving a wall in Cozumel, Mexico. Popular site, easy conditions, 70 feet deep. They'd dived it dozens of times before. Just a relaxing vacation dive. 40 minutes into the dive, David signaled to Karen, "Low on air, heading up." Standard procedure. Karen checked her own gauge. She had plenty of air left, but buddy protocol means you ascend together. She gave the OK sign and they started up. At their safety stop, 15 feet from the surface, David suddenly grabbed Karen's arm. Not panicked, just urgent. He pointed at his gauge and then at his regulator. His tank was empty, completely empty. Karen immediately went into emergency mode, offered her backup regulator, started buddy breathing. But David waved her off. He pointed at his own regulator and took a breath, then another. He was still breathing, from an empty tank. Karen tapped his gauge. 0 psi. She put her ear close to his regulator. No air sound, no bubbles coming out. But David was breathing normally, calmly, like nothing was wrong. They finished the safety stop and surfaced together. On the boat, Karen immediately checked David's equipment. The tank was empty, completely, verified empty. The pressure gauge showed 0. The valve was open. "How did you breathe for the last 5 minutes?" Karen asked. David looked confused. "What do you mean? I had air." "Your tank was empty, David. I saw it. 0 psi. I was breathing fine. Maybe the gauge malfunctioned. But the gauge hadn't malfunctioned. The dive shop tested everything. The tank, the regulator, the gauge, all functioning perfectly. The tank had been empty. The math was simple. David's air consumption rate, dive time, tank size, he'd run out exactly when Karen saw the gauge hit 0. David should have been breathing water for those last 5 minutes. Should have drowned, or at least panicked. But he'd breathed normally all the way to the surface. Karen asked him what he remembered from the safety stop. I remember feeling really calm, David said, like unnaturally calm. And I remember... He paused. This is going to sound crazy, but I remember feeling like someone was with us, like there was a third person at the safety stop, even though it was just you and me. Karen felt cold, because she'd felt it too. That presence, that sense of someone else being there. They didn't dive again for 3 days. When they finally went back in the water, everything was normal. Regular dive, no problems, but Karen kept watching David's gauge obsessively, kept checking his air every few minutes. 2 weeks later, back home, Karen was going through old photos. She found one from that Cozumel trip, a photo another diver had taken of them at the safety stop. The photo that should have shown just Karen and David, 15 feet down, waiting to surface. In the background of the photo, barely visible, there was a third diver. Blurry, distant, but definitely there. Wearing old-style equipment. Watching them. Karen zoomed in on the photo. The third diver's face was too blurry to make out, but something about the body language looked familiar. The way the diver was positioned, the way they were hovering. She showed David. He stared at the photo for a long time. That's how my dad used to float at safety stops, he said quietly. That exact posture. Hands on his knees, just waiting. David's father had died in a diving accident 8 years earlier. Drowned at 80 feet when his regulator malfunctioned, and he ran out of air before his buddy could reach him. Karen and David never talked about it after that. They still dive together. They're still the perfect buddy team. But now Karen understands something she didn't before. David should have died that day, she told me. His tank was empty. He was breathing nothing. But something gave him air. Something kept him alive long enough to surface safely. Do you think it was his father? I don't know. But I know David's father died because his regulator failed and he ran out of air. And I know that 8 years later his son ran out of air and somehow kept breathing. That's not coincidence. Karen showed me the photo. I looked at that blurry third diver in the background, and I understood why this story haunts me. Because sometimes when we run out of air underwater, when we're 15 feet from the surface and our tanks go empty, someone is there. Someone who knows what it's like to drown. Someone who won't let it happen to us. David's father couldn't save himself, but maybe somehow he saved his son, and that's the thing about diving. We're never really alone down there. The ocean remembers everyone who's died in it. And sometimes, in ways we don't understand, they watch over us, making sure we make it home. I'm part of a rapid response dive team. We're called when things go bad underwater. Trapped divers, equipment failures, emergency rescues. It's intense work. We train constantly for scenarios most divers never face. 3 months ago, we got a call I'll never forget. A tourist dive boat had lost contact with 2 divers during a reef dive at 80 feet. The divers had been down for 2 hours, way past their planned dive time. The boat had been calling them on radio, flashing lights, even banging on the hull. No response. My team was deployed immediately, 4 of us, me, Sarah, Mike, and Rodriguez. We geared up and descended to the reef where the divers had last been seen. We found them at 85 feet, sitting on the seafloor in a circle. Not swimming, not moving, just sitting. Both of them facing each other, cross-legged on the sand. I tapped the first diver's shoulder. No response. Checked his gauges. His tank had been empty for at least 40 minutes. He should have been dead, should have drowned or surfaced long ago. But his chest was moving. He was breathing. Somehow. Sarah checked the second diver. Same thing. Empty tank. Still breathing. We tried to lift them to force an emergency ascent. They wouldn't move. Not resisting exactly. Just impossibly heavy, like they were anchored to the seafloor. Rodriguez signaled to cut their weight belts. We did. They still didn't rise. Something was holding them down. That's when I noticed their eyes. Through their masks, both divers' eyes were wide open, unblinking. And they were moving. Their eyes were tracking something in the water around us, following something we couldn't see. Mike checked the first diver's dive computer. It showed they'd been at 85 feet for 4 hours. Not 2 hours like the boat reported. 4 hours. On tanks that should have lasted 40 minutes. Then things got worse. Sarah's radio crackled, but not with surface communication, with breathing. Heavy, wet breathing, like someone was on our dive channel, just breathing into their microphone. "Surface, are you hearing this?" I called. "Static." The breathing got louder, then a voice, clear as day, coming through all our radios. "They're staying." "Who is this?" Rodriguez demanded. "They're staying with us. You should stay too." I looked at Mike. Through his mask, his eyes had gone wide, blank, the same expression as the 2 divers we were trying to rescue. "Mike, look at me." I grabbed his shoulders. He smiled, slowly. And he reached down and turned off his own air supply. I watched his tank gauge drop to 0, but he kept breathing. His chest kept rising and falling, pulling air from somewhere that shouldn't exist. Then he spoke. Not on the radio. I could hear his voice directly, like he wasn't wearing a regulator. "Stay with us." Sarah grabbed my arm, pulling me back. Rodriguez was already ascending. The 3 of us kicked upward, leaving Mike and the 2 tourist divers sitting on the bottom. As we rose, I looked down. There were more of them now. 5 divers sitting in a circle, then 7, then 10, all appearing out of nowhere, all sitting perfectly still, all staring up at us with those blank, unblinking eyes. We broke the surface. The boat pulled us out. I was screaming for them to send down more divers to rescue Mike, but the boat captain just shook his head. "This happened before," he said. 3 years ago, same reef. 6 divers went down, only 2 came back." "What are you talking about?" "The ones who stay down there, they don't come back. And if you go down to get them, you don't come back either." We tried anyway. Sent down an ROV with cameras. The footage showed Mike and the 2 tourists still sitting in their circle, still breathing with empty tanks, and around them dozens of other divers, maybe 50, maybe more. All in various states of equipment decay, some in gear from decades ago, all sitting in perfect circles on the reef floor, all breathing, all alive, all staying. The Coast Guard cordoned off the area, classified it as a hazardous dive site. The official report said the 3 missing divers drowned due to equipment failure. Case closed. But I've been back to that site. Not diving, just on boats passing by. And sometimes on calm days you can see them down there, sitting in their circles, waiting for more divers to join them. Mike's family asked me what happened. I told them equipment failure, quick death. He didn't suffer, but I see him sometimes in my dreams, still down there, still sitting in that circle, still breathing impossible air, still smiling. Marco retired last month after 30 years of dive instruction. His final day, he did something he never does. He went diving alone. No students, no clients, no responsibility. Just Marco and the ocean. He went to his secret reef. The one where he'd taken his son Thomas for his certification dive all those years ago. The one where Thomas saw Marco's father, the grandfather he'd never met. Marco told me about this dive last week. He doesn't usually talk about personal dives, but this one was different. He descended to 60 feet. The reef was exactly as he remembered. Healthy coral, schools of fish, crystal clear water. He'd been diving this spot for 30 years, and it never changed. His constant. His church. Marco swam along the reef wall, not looking for anything in particular. Just being there. Saying goodbye, maybe. This would be his last dive as a professional. After today, he was just a retired guy who liked the ocean. That's when he saw the other diver, an older man, maybe 70, swimming along the reef about 30 feet away. Old-style equipment, the kind from the 1980s, the kind Marco's father used to wear. Marco checked his dive computer. It showed 2 divers on the dive, him and one other. But Marco had come alone. The other diver waved. Marco waved back. They swam parallel to each other for a few minutes, maintaining distance, just 2 divers enjoying the reef. Then the other diver stopped and pointed at something. Marco swam over. It was a small cave in the reef wall, maybe 4 feet across. Marco had never noticed it before, despite diving this reef hundreds of times. The other diver gestured, "Go inside." Marco knew he shouldn't. Solo diving in overhead environments is dangerous, but something told him it was okay, that he was supposed to look. He swam into the cave. It was shallow, maybe 10 feet deep, and at the back, wedged into the rocks, was something metal. A dive knife. Corroded, old, the handle barely intact. But Marco recognized it immediately. It was his father's knife. The one his father had been wearing when he died in that diving accident 30 years ago. The one they never recovered with his body. Marco carefully extracted the knife from the rocks, held it in his gloved hands. His father's knife. Here, in Marco's secret reef, in a cave Marco had never seen before. When he turned around, the other diver was right there, close enough to touch, and Marco could see his face clearly through the mask. It was his father, exactly as Marco remembered him, same age he'd been when he died, same smile. Marco's father reached out and touched Marco's shoulder. Not a grab, not a pat, just rested his hand there, the way he used to when Marco was a kid and needed reassurance. Then his father pointed upward. Time to surface. They ascended together, Marco and his father, side by side, just like they used to dive together when Marco was young, when his father was teaching him everything he'd later teach to 2,847 students. At the safety stop, Marco's father gave him the OK sign. Marco returned it. His father smiled and pointed up again. "You go. I'll stay." Marco continued to the surface alone. When he looked back down during his ascent, his father was still at the safety stop waving. Marco broke the surface, climbed onto his boat, looked at the knife in his hand, real, solid, corroded with 30 years of ocean. When he checked his dive computer later, it showed only 1 diver on the dive. Just Marco, no second person. "I know what you're thinking," Marco told me. "Narcosis, hallucination, grief manifesting as a vision. I've heard all the rational explanations." He showed me the knife. "But I have this, I have my father's knife, from a cave I'd never seen before, on a reef I've dived 1,000 times. How do you explain that?" I couldn't. I didn't try. "My father was there," Marco said. "He's been there the whole time, watching me teach, watching me train students, watching me become the diver he taught me to be. And on my last dive, he wanted me to know." "Know what?" "That I did good, that he's proud, that when I'm down there I'm not alone, none of us are." Marco mounted that knife on his office wall, right next to the photo of his father. 2 knives now. His father's corroded one from the past, and the new one from his students for the future. Every diver who ever died underwater is still down there, Marco said. Not haunting, not trapped, just watching, making sure we're safe. My father's been watching me for 30 years. And now that I'm retired, now that I'm not responsible for students anymore, he wanted me to have this. A reminder. A reminder of what? Marco smiled. That the ocean takes care of its own, and that some debts can't be repaid in life, but they can be honored in death. My father taught me to dive. I taught 2,147 others, and somewhere, somehow, that matters. Marco doesn't dive much anymore, but sometimes, on calm days, he'll take his boat out to that reef. He doesn't go down, just sits on the surface looking at the water, visiting his father, who's still down there, still diving, still watching, still proud of his son.